Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with Extra History, this time the Bronze Age collapse, the wheel and the rod, number dos. Before we dive into the video though, make sure you check out the links below in my description box or in my pinned comment in the comment section. I got a link to my gaming channel here on YouTube and a link to my Twitch channel. Would love it if you threw me a follow and hung out in the chat. And now that that's out of the way, the Bronze Age collapse. We've got a wheel rolling down the road. Let's go ahead and, well, learn some more about the Bronze Age.
The wheel turns. Ages pass. Society becomes more advanced. Advancement leads to stability, to connection, to peace. But what happens when that's not true?
Well, then none of the things that you said happen. Words. I am a wordsmith.
Often, when we think of the ancient past, the times before the Greeks and the Romans, we think of a barbaric or a primitive age. But that age of barbarism we think of actually followed the late Bronze Age collapse. Before the collapse?
And also happens in some parts, well, specifically in Britain during the Roman exodus out of Britain. They go through something similar as the Bronze Age collapse, where they revert to pre-Roman kind of society, which I guess, you know, you can kind of see as being a bit problematic by saying, oh, Rome was civilized and then pre-Romans were not. But like there was a lot more violence that happened, a lot more fighting, which I think is why they call it barbaric.
There were societies that wouldn't be rivaled again for half a millennium. So today, let's look at the technology, social policies, and political structures that made these kingdoms so impressive, so advanced, and that may, in the end, have led to their downfall. First, we have to talk about bronze itself. As we touched on last time, bronze is an alloy of tin and copper, and most of the Bronze Age world was missing at least one of those components. This meant that Bronze Age civilizations had to trade. And I'm not just talking about small-time exchanging of shinies. We're talking a full-on, modern-day, our society requires trade to function type of trade. Everything from farming to war depended on bronze, much in the same way.
Yeah, this is the one misconception that I think. Now, I'm not saying Extra History is saying a misconception. They are right. I'm talking about the misconception that widespread trade did not exist before really the modern age. The idea of international trade. I don't know how this misconception started, but I think at least when I was in it's been getting pushed against, right? This concept of there's an emphasis on talking about how the world was interconnected before really the modern day, before widespread ship travel, right? At least there just wasn't international trade with the Americas, right? Because no one really knew they were there. So yeah, but like Africa, Eurasia trade, that was a big thing. That's been going on since before the Bronze Age, you know? So, yeah. I like that they're pointing this out, that they are acknowledging, yo, big trade, international trade was a thing.
It depends on petroleum today. So a globalized, internationalized system of trade sprung up around bronze, and with it came trade in almost every other good. This was a positive thing. It allowed a material standard of wealth, especially for the nobility, that was unrivaled anywhere in the world, except maybe for China. This level of wealth wouldn't be seen again until the Classical Age. But it also meant that the kingdoms of the period were sort of like a Jenga tower. They stood tall, but if too many pieces got pulled out, that whole thing would come crashing down. So this interconnected system of trade, while enormously beneficial, may perhaps have also been one of the factors leading to the Bronze Age collapse. Next, let's talk war. Because in this period, the chariot was king. Almost all the major powers of the time built their armies around a chariot corps of one type or another. And here's the thing about chariots. They're really expensive and they're difficult to use. You can sort of think of them like medieval knights. It takes a lifetime of training to use these weapons, and maintaining them costs a small fortune. This meant that, like medieval knights, many kingdoms had a hereditary warrior class that was dedicated to doing just this. But what happens if you lose a ton of those guys at once? You can't
You're
just replace
fucked.
them. It takes years to train a guy up to the point where he can be proficient with a chariot. And what happens if your economy collapses? You no longer
You're
have the
fucked.
spare resources to maintain a caste whose singular role is to train to use some complex weapon, much less to pay artisans to build that weapon and technicians to maintain it. And so, while this particular engine of war was highly effective in a time when we hadn't really bred horses big enough to carry a man in full armor, it was also a liability. If things went really wrong, you could no longer maintain this highly sophisticated military machine. And then what happens if you need to defend yourself? What happens if you
You're
face
fucked.
some outside threat? What happens if you have to fight, but your whole conception of what an army is no longer viable? And so, again, this very weapon that made many of these states so dominant is perhaps one of the dominoes that sets us up for the Bronze Age collapse. And since we're talking about armies, let's talk about the governments they fought for, because these were incredibly organized, incredibly centralized governments. The level of central control in the late Bronze Age...
Oh, I love how they have this in farmers being at the bottom here. Oh, yes. I love the detail here.
States is almost mind-boggling, far, far beyond the monarchies of the Middle Ages, perhaps even more than many modern states, which is important because due to this centralized control, many of the late Bronze Age kingdoms were structured as command economies. Every piece of grain, every dram of olive oil, every bar of bronze was tallied by the central government. Farmers were told what to plant, where to plant, and when. Mines were state-run operations, and clearly this varies a bit from nation to nation, but from Egypt to Mycenae, you had top-down economies organized by the central authority. But what happens to a top-down economy when the top goes missing? If you're a laborer, and every year an official comes and gives you the seeds you're supposed to plant, and tells you when and where to plant them, what happens if that official just stops showing up? And this issue is compounded by two other pieces of technology. The first is irrigation. Bronze Age societies had very sophisticated irrigation systems. These were massive public works projects that took effort to maintain, and it took some element of centralized planning to build them efficiently to maximize crop yield. After all, having every farmer dig their own irrigation is going to get way messier than simply laying out 1,000 plots at once. This was great, as it meant high crop yields, which in turn meant that you could support big cities filled with artisans, priests, warrior nobles, and bureaucrats. And being able to support so many specialized positions in turn means more material wealth, a stronger government, and more opportunity for innovation. But what happens when that irrigation system gets destroyed, or simply stops functioning as efficiently? Well, then you've got a whole mess of people in your society who don't make food. And even ignoring the potential problems that arise from the fact that some of these people are very well armed, what happens when you can't support the non-food producers, but they're the planners who make this system run? The problem just compounds.
Yeah. Oh, it's like a paradox. It's like a cyclical... Oh, I love how they're explaining this. Like, I don't know what to say. They're just explaining it so well here.
Until you have a
Doing a
runaway
great job.
collapse. And that's not the only problem caused by using advanced irrigation to support an ever-growing population. First, there's the obvious issue of overpopulation. Even if your food supply can support a large number of people, can the rest of your infrastructure? There are health and sewage concerns. There's a question as to whether your economy can really employ all of these people. And of course, there's the question of whether you can keep these people from revolting. But there's also a less obvious problem with this type of intense agriculture, and that is soil degradation. Whenever you heavily farm an area, you leach out minerals, you create erosion, and you disturb the soil biology. Today, we do a great deal with modern farming techniques to avoid this, but the late Bronze Age was perhaps the first time that humans had farmed on this scale. And as we mentioned last time, while the Nile did bring with it rich silt that helped to restore the soil whenever it flooded, this just wasn't true of many of the other kingdoms. And so, silently, year after year, perhaps too slowly for anyone to really notice, crop yields decreased, and with them the ability to support the ever-growing population of the late Bronze Age states. And lastly, we have to talk about writing, because the Bronze Age
Words.
world had come to rely on writing for everything from highly advanced record keeping to international diplomacy. But a scribe is sort of like a knight of letters. They're amazingly powerful, but they're also expensive, and they require training from a young age. And though history shows that having the written word propels civilizations forward, and that every small increase in literacy ends up rippling out into large increases in the well-being of a society over time, even this idea that we usually think of as a purely positive, beneficial technology creates a potential liability. After all, if your whole society depends on written records and on record keeping, what do you do when there's no one left to write the records? And so, piece by piece, the very complexity, the very advancedness that made late Bronze Age societies so impressive, so much better to live in than anything that followed for hundreds of years, also made them more fragile. As societies became complex, interweaving chains of trade, agriculture, education, and bureaucracy, the potential damage that could be caused by removing any link from those chains grew and grew. So join us next time as we look at what might have caused those chains to snap.
I love how they're handling the Bronze Age collapse. I have no complaint. I don't even know what to add on. And they just did such a job. Oh, I love it. That was the Bronze Age collapse, the wheel and the rod, extra history, number 2. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.